I called the police on my parents during their hidden anniversary party. My parents are obsessed with the image of the perfect family. To the world, they have two beautiful daughters who are identical twins. My sisters, Clara and Mia, are the local celebrities of our small town. They are on every billboard for my dad's real estate company and every social media post my mom makes. They wear matching dresses and have matching smiles. But there is a reason I am never in the photos. I am the third triplet. While Clara and Mia were born healthy and identical, I was born with a severe facial cleft and a host of respiratory issues. My parents saw my sisters as assets and me as a liability. They decided early on that having a disabled child would ruin the brand they were building, so they told the town the third baby didn't make it. And they even held a tiny private funeral with an empty casket to seal the lie. I grew up in the attic of our Victorian house. It was a beautiful room filled with books and toys, but it was a prison nonetheless. My parents told me it was for my own protection because the world was too cruel for someone who looked like me. I spent my days watching my sisters through a telescope as they played in the garden. They knew about me, of course. My mother forced them to keep the secret by telling them that if anyone found out, our family would be ruined and we would all end up on the street. Clara and Mia would sneak up to the attic every afternoon. They would bring me pieces of birthday cake, extra school supplies, and stories about the outside world. They called me the secret star. On my 10th birthday, Mia brought me a Polaroid camera she had saved up for. I started taking pictures of them from the attic window, documenting the life I was supposed to be living. I had boxes of photos labeled with the things I missed. First bike ride, first crush, prom night. The breaking point came last month. My parents were throwing a massive 20th anniversary gala at our house. They invited hundreds of people, including local politicians and news crews. They spent weeks preparing the gardens and the ballroom. My mother came up to the attic and told me I had to stay absolutely silent. She even gave me a pair of noise-canceling headphones and told me to stay away from the windows. While the party was in full swing, I found a guest list on the floor that my mother must have dropped. It wasn't just a list of names. It was a script for a speech my father was going to give. He was planning to announce a massive donation to a children's hospital in memory of his late daughter. He was going to use my supposed death to gain sympathy and tax breaks for his new development project. He had even printed brochures with a fake Photoshop picture of what I would have looked like if I were healthy and identical to my sisters. I looked at the brochure and felt something snap. I wasn't a tragedy to be used for a headline. I was a person. I waited until my father was on the stage in the garden, right under my attic window. The crowd was silent, listening to his practiced, shaky voice talk about the hole in his heart left by the child he lost. I didn't use the smoke detector. I used the Wi-Fi. And I had spent years teaching myself how to code on the laptop they gave me for homeschooling. I hacked into the high-tech audio-visual system my dad had rented for the night. Just as he reached the climax of his speech, the giant projector screens behind him flickered. Instead of the polished memorial slideshow, they showed the live feed from my attic. The crowd gasped. There I was, standing in the middle of my room, surrounded by the boxes of photos I had taken of my sisters. I held up a sign I had painted in bright red letters. It said, "I am not dead." My father froze. He looked up at my window, his face a mask of pure terror. My mother dropped her glass of champagne, and the sound of it shattering was picked up by the microphone. I grabbed the burner phone Clara had smuggled in for me and dialed the emergency line. I told the operator I was being held against my will and gave the address. And I walked to the attic window, pushed it open, and stepped out onto the small balcony. The floodlights from the party hit me. Hundreds of people stared up at the girl they thought had been buried 10 years ago. I saw Clara and Mia standing near the stage, and for the first time, they weren't smiling for the cameras. They were looking at me with a mixture of fear and relief. The police arrived within minutes. Because of the crowd and the live broadcast, there was no way for my parents to hide. The officers came up the stairs and broke the lock on the attic door. When they saw the room, the books, and the years of hidden life, the lead officer looked sick to his stomach. My parents were arrested on the spot for child endangerment and kidnapping. The story hit every national news outlet by morning. My sisters and I were placed with our aunt, who had been told the same lies as everyone else. She cried for 3 days straight when she finally met me. I had several surgeries to help my breathing and repair my cleft. I still look different from my sisters, and I always will, but I don't hide anymore. We moved to a new state where no one knows us as the twins and the secret. Now, when people ask how many siblings I have, I don't wait for someone else to answer. I look them in the eye and tell them there are 3 of us. And for the first time in my life, nobody tries to tell me I am wrong. The trial lasted 6 months. My father tried to use his connections at first, calling in favors from the local council members he'd wined and dined for years. But the evidence was everywhere. It wasn't just the room in the attic or the fake death certificate they'd somehow forged. It was the digital footprint. When the forensic team went through my father's business emails, they found chains of messages discussing the liability management of my existence. He'd written off my food and medical supplies as office expenses for his real estate firm. My mother sat in the courtroom every day, her hair perfectly coiffed, wearing a navy blue suit that screamed grieving mother. She didn't look at me once, not even when I took the stand. When the prosecutor asked her why she did it, she didn't cry. She just said, "You don't understand the pressure of maintaining a brand in this market." To her, I wasn't a daughter. I was a PR crisis that never went away. Clara and Mia testified against them too. And that was the part that broke my parents' defense. They tried to claim they were protecting me from a cruel world, but my sisters told the jury about the nights they spent sitting on the other side of the locked attic door, whispering to me through the wood. They talked about the punishment drills, where my mother would make them stand in front of the mirror and practice smiling for 10 minutes straight if they ever mentioned my name. The jury returned a guilty verdict on all counts: kidnapping, child endangerment, and a dozen counts of financial fraud related to the charity my father had set up in my name. They were sentenced to 15 years each. As the bailiff led my father out, he finally looked at me. There was no love there, just a cold, sharp anger that I had been the one to pull the thread that unraveled his perfect tapestry. Our life with my Aunt Sarah was a massive adjustment. She lives in a small town outside of Portland. It's the kind of place where the air smells like pine and damp earth, not the expensive jasmine candles my mother used to burn to mask the smell of cleaning supplies. For the first few months, I didn't know how to handle the space. I would sit in the corner of my new bedroom, waiting for someone to lock the door. "June, the door is open," Sarah would say, gently tapping on the frame. "It's always open." I had my 3rd major reconstructive surgery 3 months ago. The doctors at the university hospital are different from the ones my parents used to pay to come to the house in the middle of the night. These doctors look me in the eye. They explain the procedures. They don't treat me like a broken toy that needs to be glued back together. And the physical pain is manageable. It's the sound of the world that still gets to me. In the attic, everything was muffled. Now, the sound of a car backfiring or a loud TV makes my heart race. Mia and Clara are always there to ground me. They moved in with Sarah, too. For the first time, they aren't wearing matching outfits. Clara dyed her hair a dark cherry red, and Mia got a small tattoo of a star on her wrist. Last week, we went to the grocery store together. Just a normal trip for milk and bread. A woman in the cereal aisle stopped and stared at me. I could feel the old instinct to duck my head, to hide hide behind my sisters to wait for the attic door to close, but I didn't. I reached up and adjusted my glasses, feeling the scars along my jawline. Is there something you need? I asked her, but my voice was raspy from the respiratory surgeries, but it was clear. The woman looked embarrassed and mumbled a no before scurrying away. I looked at Mia, and she was grinning. She didn't have to pretend to be a perfect twin anymore. She was just a girl standing with her sister. My parents' house back home was seized and sold at auction to pay for the legal fees and the restitution they owed me. I heard the new owners tore down the Victorian facade and turned it into a modern, open-concept home. They knocked out the attic walls to make a loft with floor-to-ceiling windows. I like that. I like the idea of that dark, cramped space being filled with light. Every night before I go to bed, I look at the Polaroid camera Mia gave me. It's sitting on my nightstand next to a photo of the three of us sitting on Sarah's porch. In the photo, and I'm in the middle. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not hiding in the shadows. I'm just June, and I am very much alive. The transition to a normal life wasn't a straight line. It was a series of small, terrifying firsts. The first time I walked into a cafe. The first time I sat in a movie theater. The first time I saw my own reflection in a public restroom mirror and didn't immediately look away. Adjusting to the outside world felt like learning a language everyone else had been speaking since birth while I was still struggling with the alphabet. I had spent 20 years observing life through a lens and a screen. Actually touching it was overwhelming. The texture of grass against my bare feet for the first time made me cry because it was so much sharper and colder than I had imagined. So Aunt Sarah helped me set up a bank account with the restitution money from the court case. It was a strange feeling having value that didn't depend on a brand or a hidden secret. For weeks, I just stared at the balance on the ATM screen. My father had spent more on the floral arrangements for that anniversary party than he had on my entire upbringing. Yet here was a number that belonged to me. What do you want to do first? Clara asked me one evening. We were sitting on the floor of my room sorting through the boxes of Polaroids I'd brought from the attic. I want to go to a library, I said. A real one, where I can touch the books before I decide to read them. We went the next day. The silence of the library was different from the silence of the attic. The attic was a heavy, suffocating silence, the sound of things being unsaid. The library was a light silence, the sound of 1,000 voices waiting to be heard. I spent 4 hours in the history section, just running my fingers over the spines. I didn't have to hide. I didn't have to listen for the heavy tread of my father's shoes on the stairs. But the past didn't stay buried just because my parents were behind bars. About 8 months after the move, a documentary crew reached out to Aunt Sarah. They wanted to do a deep dive into the triplets of Blackwood. They offered a lot of money. It's your choice, June, Sarah said, handing me the letter. Always your choice. I looked at the glossy letterhead. They wanted to talk about the tragedy and the miracle. They wanted to use the photos I took, and they wanted to turn my trauma into another product for people to consume while they ate dinner. No, I said, and I felt a surge of power I'd never known. I spent my whole life being a story they told. I'm done being a story. Clara and Mia backed me up instantly. They turned down every interview, every exclusive deal. We started our own tradition instead. Every Sunday we go for a hike. My lungs are still weak. The respiratory issues from my birth will always be there, so we go slow. I carry my camera, but I don't take pictures of them from a distance anymore. I take pictures of the things we see together. A strange-shaped leaf, a bird, the way the light hits the trail. The most difficult part was the letters. My mother started writing to me from prison about a year into her sentence. And the first one was full of explanations. She claimed she did it because she couldn't bear to see me suffer in public. She said she was a victim of my father's ambition. I didn't finish reading it. I didn't need her version of the truth anymore. I have my own. I recently started taking a coding class at the local community college. I'm the oldest one in the room, and I still wear a mask sometimes when my scars feel particularly tight or the air is too cold. But nobody asks questions. In the digital world, it doesn't matter what my face looks like. The logic is clean. The code either works or it doesn't. There's no room for lies in a binary system. Last night, I had a dream about the attic. In the dream, I was standing by the window watching the party below. But when I looked down at the garden, it wasn't my parents or the politicians. It was just me, Clara, and Mia sitting in the grass, eating cake and laughing. I woke up to the sound of rain on the roof. Real rain hitting a house that I could leave whenever I wanted. I got up, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I stood there in the dark, looking out at the streetlights, breathing in the cold, honest air. I'm not the secret star anymore. I'm just a woman who survived, and that is more than enough. The reality of being normal meant dealing with the debris my parents left behind in my sisters. While I was learning how to live, Clara and Mia were learning how to stop performing. One night, I found Mia in the kitchen at 3 a.m., meticulously scrubbing the baseboards with a toothbrush. She was crying, her movements mechanical. When I touched her shoulder, she jumped nearly a foot in the air. I didn't do it right, June, she whispered, her eyes glazed over. The image. I messed up the post. Dad's going to be livid. It took me 20 minutes to convince her that there was no post, no dad, and no image to maintain. My parents hadn't just locked me in a room, they had locked my sisters in a script. We spent the rest of the night sitting on the kitchen floor, eating cereal straight from the box. It was the first time I realized that while I was the one with the physical scars, their spirits had been surgically altered to fit a mold that didn't exist. As the second year of our freedom approached, I decided to do something for myself that didn't involve doctors or lawyers. I enrolled in a photography workshop, not for secret star shots from a distance, but for portraits. I wanted to learn how to look at people, really look at them, without flinching. On the first day, the instructor asked us to partner up and take photos that captured the essence of the subject. I was paired with a guy named Leo. He had messy hair and a Nikon that looked like it had been through a war. When it was his turn to shoot me, I felt the familiar panic rising. I wanted to pull my hair forward, to tilt my head so the cleft scars were in the shadow. Don't, Leo said softly, looking over the top of his camera. The light is hitting that ridge on your cheek perfectly. It looks like a map. A map of what? I asked, my voice cracking. Of where you've been, he said. He didn't look away. He didn't look at me with the pitying charity eyes my father practiced in the mirror. He just clicked the shutter, and that photo ended up in the end of semester gallery. I stood in front of it for a long time. It was a black and white close-up. My skin wasn't airbrushed. The asymmetry of my mouth was right there, front and center. But for the first time, I didn't see a liability. I saw a survivor. I saw the girl who hacked a multi-million-dollar security system with a burner phone and a grudge. Shortly after the gallery, we got word that my father was up for a sentence reduction hearing due to overcrowding and his supposedly exemplary behavior in the white-collar wing. The state offered me the chance to submit a victim impact statement. Aunt Sarah told me I didn't have to do it. She said we could just keep moving forward, but I knew that as long as I stayed silent, he still held a piece of me in that attic. I didn't go to the prison. I recorded a video. I sat in front of the camera in Sarah's garden, the sun bright on my face. I didn't read from a script. You told me the world was too cruel for someone who looks like me, I said, looking straight into the lens. But the only cruelty I ever knew came from your house. You didn't hide me to protect me. You hid me because you were a coward. You couldn't sell a life that wasn't perfect, so you tried to erase it. But I'm still here, and And every time I breathe, I am a reminder that you failed. The board denied his request. He'll serve the full 15 years. Today, the three of us are celebrating our real birthday, the anniversary of the night I stepped out onto that balcony. We don't do matching dresses. Clara is wearing a vintage band tee. Mia is in a sundress. Yes, and I'm wearing a sweater that's 3 sizes too big because I like the way the wool feels. We bought a cake from the bakery in town. The woman behind the counter knows us now. She doesn't call us the triplets. She calls us the girls. What are we wishing for? Mia asked, holding a lighter over the candles. I looked at my sisters. I looked at my hands, steady and strong. I thought about the attic, the telescope, and the girl who used to dream of just being seen. Nothing, I said, and I meant it. I don't need to wish for anything. I'm already here. I blew out the candles, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the dark, because I knew that when the sun came up, I'd be the one deciding exactly where the light was going to fall. The third year was when the dreams of the attic finally stopped, and it didn't happen all at once, but slowly. The smell of old wood and the sound of a turning lock faded from my subconscious. I stopped waking up at 4 a.m. to check if the door was still open. I stopped hoarding granola bars under my mattress, just in case the meals stopped coming. I started working part-time at the community college's IT help desk. It was a small job, mostly fixing broken printers and resetting passwords for students who'd had a few too many drinks the night before. But it gave me a sense of rhythm. People would come in, see my face, and there would be that split-second flicker of surprise. I used to count those flickers. I used to let them crush me. Now I just wait for them to pass. Screens flickering? I asked a guy who had walked in with a cracked laptop. He was staring a bit too long at the scar on my upper lip. Yeah, dropped it, he stammered, looking down at his shoes. I can fix the screen, I said, pulling the laptop toward me. Can't fix the gravity, though? He laughed, a genuine awkward sound, and the tension broke. That was my new superpower, making people feel okay with the fact that I wasn't perfect. It was a power my parents never understood. They thought perfection was the only way to be loved. They were so wrong, it was almost pathetic. Clara and Mia were finding their own feet, too. Clara started a small gardening business. She said she spent so many years being looked at in a garden like a prop that she wanted to be the one actually digging in the dirt. Mia was studying psychology. She wanted to understand how two people could look at their own child and see a balance sheet instead of a human being. We were all healing, but we were healing in different directions, and that was okay. The biggest shift came when a local journalist contacted us, not for a sensationalized TV special, but for a piece on the Blackwood Trust. It turns out my father's charity for his late daughter had left behind a mess of legal loopholes. There was still a significant amount of money tied up in a trust fund that was technically mine. I sat down with a lawyer in a bright glass-walled office in the city. He was a sharp guy in a gray suit who didn't blink once at my appearance. The money was intended for a memorial, the lawyer explained, tapping a pen on a thick stack of documents. Since you are, well, quite clearly alive, the purpose of the trust is void. Under the current bylaws, the funds revert to you as the sole beneficiary. And it's nearly 200,000 euro, June. I looked at the number on the paper. That was the price of my death. That was the value they had placed on my absence. I don't want it, I said. Aunt Sarah, sitting next to me, squeezed my hand. You don't have to decide now. No, I do, I said. I don't want his blood money. I don't want to build a life on the lie he told. I spent the next month working with a lawyer to redirect every cent. I didn't give it to a big, faceless hospital. I split it between 3 small organizations. One that provided surgeries for children with facial differences, one that supported siblings of abused children, and a local shelter for kids who had been discarded by their families. I kept exactly €1 for myself. I have it framed on my wall. It's a reminder that I am the only one who gets to decide what I'm worth. The final tether snapped last Tuesday. A box arrived at Sarah's house from the prison. It was my mother's personal effects. She had been moved to a high-security psychiatric wing after a breakdown, and they were clearing out her cell. Inside was a small, leather-bound journal. I sat on the porch and opened it. I expected apologies, or maybe more justifications. Instead, I found page after page of her practicing her signature, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, over and over, and tucked in the back was a single clipping from a magazine from 20 years ago. It was a photo of a perfect house with a perfect lawn. She hadn't been a mother, she'd been a curator. She'd spent her whole life trying to live inside a photograph, and I was the smudge she couldn't wipe away. Then I walked over to the fire pit in the backyard, dropped the journal in, and watched the pages curl and turn to ash. I didn't feel angry. I just felt clean. That night, for the first time, I invited Leo over for dinner. He brought a bottle of wine and a new set of lenses he wanted to show me. We sat on the porch with my sisters and Aunt Sarah, the sound of the crickets filling the gaps in our conversation. At one point, Leo took a candid photo of the table. In the shot, the wine glasses are half empty, the bread is torn into pieces, and Clara is mid-laugh. I'm leaning back in my chair, my face fully illuminated by the porch light. I'm not the most beautiful person in the world by the standards my parents live by. My face is a patchwork of surgeries and history. But as I looked at the digital preview on Leo's camera, I realized I finally liked what I saw. I wasn't a secret. I wasn't a tragedy. I was just a woman having dinner with her family on a warm Tuesday night. I took a deep breath, the air moving easily through my lungs, and for the first time, the future didn't look like a long, dark hallway. It looked like an open road, and I was the one behind the wheel. The 4th year felt like the first year of my actual adulthood. The novelty of freedom had worn off, replaced by the quiet, steady hum of a life I'd built with my own hands. I wasn't just the girl from the attic anymore. In our new town, I was just June, the IT specialist who could salvage a liquid-damaged motherboard while explaining why your operating system was lagging. Leo and I started spending more time together outside of photography. He didn't treat me like a porcelain doll, and he didn't treat me like a project. One afternoon, we were hiking up a trail that overlooked the valley. My breath was heavy, my lungs burning a bit from the incline, but I refused to stop. You okay? He asked, pausing to adjust his camera bag. I'm fine, I panted, wiping sweat from my forehead. Just taking in the scenery. You know, he said, leaning against a tree. You don't have to prove anything to the mountain. It doesn't care how fast you climb it. I looked at him and laughed. I'm not proving it to the mountain, Leo. I'm proving it to the girl who used to watch people hike through a telescope. We reached the summit just as the sun began to dip. The valley was bathed in a deep bruised purple. Leo didn't take a picture of the sunset. He took a picture of me looking at it. For the first time, I didn't ask to see the preview to make sure I looked okay. I knew I looked alive, and that was enough. Back at home, the dynamic between the 3 of us, the triplets, had shifted into something beautiful and sturdy. Clara's landscaping business was thriving. She specialized in hidden gardens, ironically enough, creating small private sanctuaries for people in the city. Mia was finishing her degree. Her thesis focused on the psychological impact of parental narcissism. She was turning our trauma into a map for others to find their way out. Then came the letter from the state's parole board. It wasn't about my father this time. It was about my mother. Her mental health had deteriorated to the point where they were considering a compassionate release to a long-term care facility. Because she had no other family, they were reaching out to us. The 3 of us sat around Sarah's kitchen table with the letter in the center. The silence was thick. She's a stranger, Clara said, her voice hard. She's been a stranger since the day she decided to tell people people I only had one sister. She's sick, Mia added softly, the therapist in her battling the daughter. But being sick doesn't erase what she did. It doesn't undo the attic. They both looked at me. In our house, I had become the unofficial compass. Because I had suffered the most, they felt my vote carried the most weight. I looked at the letter thinking about the woman who had practiced her signature in a prison cell while her daughter learned how to breathe. I'm not going to be her caretaker, I said, my voice steady. I spent 20 years in a room because of her. I'm not spending the rest of my life in another room, even a hospital room, watching her fade away. We signed the papers saying we waive our right to be her guardians. Let the state handle it. We signed the documents together. It wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of completion. We were finally closing the book. That summer, I decided to take the leap and apply for a full-time position at a tech firm in the city. During the interview, the hiring manager looked at my resume, then at me. I could see the question forming in his eyes, the curiosity about the scars, the slight rasp in my voice. I see you were homeschooled, he said, flipping through my certifications. And you've managed to pick up some high-level security credentials in a very short time. Where did you train? I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the desk. I'm self-taught. I had a lot of time on my hands in a very controlled environment. I learned that if you want to know how a system works, you have to look at the parts people try to hide. He smiled, a sharp, appreciative glint in his eyes. When can you start? The job changed everything. I moved into my own apartment, a small, sun-drenched studio with big windows and a view of the park. No locks on the outside of the doors, no telescopes, just me and a cat named Pixel who didn't care about my facial symmetry as long as I filled the food bowl. On the 5-year anniversary of the gala, I didn't throw a party. I didn't make a post. I didn't do anything memorial. Instead, I went to the park with Leo. We sat on a bench and watched a group of kids playing tag. One little girl tripped and scraped her knee. She cried for a second. Then her mom picked her up, kissed the bruise, and sent her back into the game. I watched them, feeling a dull ache for the childhood I never had, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of gratitude for the woman I had become. What are you thinking about? Leo asked, nudging my shoulder. Just thinking about how loud the world is, I said, leaning my head on his shoulder, and how much I love the noise. I pulled my burner phone out of my pocket, the one Clara had smuggled to me all those years ago. I'd kept it as a relic, a piece of the bridge I'd used to escape. I walked over to the trash can near the path and dropped it in. I didn't need the escape hatch anymore. I wasn't running. I was home. As we walked back to my apartment, the streetlights began to flicker on, one by one, lighting the way forward. I took Leo's hand, so my thumb tracing the calluses on his palm. I didn't look back at the shadows. I just kept walking, my head held high, a third triplet finally standing in the light. The 6th year was the year I stopped being a survivor and started being a builder. My career in cybersecurity took off faster than I expected. I wasn't just fixing printers anymore. I was designing protocols to protect people's private data. I think I have a natural instinct for it because I know exactly what it feels like to have your life monitored, analyzed, and controlled. I build digital walls that nobody can peek through without permission. In the spring, I received a package from an attorney I didn't recognize. It was from my father's estate, not the money he'd stolen, but a collection of personal effects that had been sitting in a storage locker since the arrest. And I almost threw it away, but curiosity won. Inside were boxes of old blueprints for the Victorian house. I spread them out on my floor, Pixel sniffing at the corners of the yellowed paper. I traced the lines of the attic with my finger. On the original architectural drawings, my room didn't exist. It was labeled as unfinished storage. Seeing it written there in cold, professional ink was the final proof I needed. They hadn't just hidden me, they had planned for my non-existence before I was even born. I didn't cry. I just felt a strange sense of irony. They tried to build a house without a heart, and the heart was the very thing that brought the whole structure down. I decided to take some of my savings and buy a small cabin a few hours north of the city. It's the opposite of a Victorian mansion. It's made of cedar and glass. I tucked away in a forest where the only neighbors are the deer and the occasional hiker. There is no attic, there are no secrets. Clara and Mia helped me move in. We spent a weekend painting the walls a soft, warm white. We sat on the deck that night, drinking wine and looking at the stars. For the first time, we didn't talk about the past. We didn't talk about the trial or our parents or the gala. We talked about Clara's new contract for a city park and Mia's upcoming graduation from her master's program. I'm thinking about changing my last name, Mia said suddenly, staring into the dark woods. I don't want to be a Blackwood when I open my practice. I don't want that name on my door. To what? I asked. Sarah's maiden name, Miller, she said. Simple, solid. It doesn't carry any ghosts. I think I'll keep mine, I said. I'm surprised by my own words. They both looked at me. Why? Clara asked. After everything they did? Because I'm the only one who made that name stand for something real, I said. When people hear the name Blackwood now, they don't think of a perfect real estate mogul. They think of the girl who stood on a balcony and told the truth. I reclaimed it. It belongs to me now, not them. A few months later, Leo came up to the cabin. He brought a heavy wooden crate with him. When I opened it, I found a professional-grade darkroom setup. You've been taking digital shots for years, June, he said, helping me carry the equipment into the spare room. But I think you'd like the process of developing film. It's slow. It requires patience. You have to sit in the dark and wait for the image to reveal itself. I looked at the red light of the darkroom, the trays of chemicals, and the blank paper. I realized he was right. My whole life had been a process of waiting in the dark for my own image to appear. I started taking portraits of people in the city, not the polished, brand-ready people my mother loved, but the real ones. The street vendors with calloused hands, the tired nurses at the end of a double shift, the kids with messy hair and grass-stained knees. I captured every blemish, every scar, every tired line, and people loved them. They said my photos made them feel seen. I had my final checkup with my surgeon last month. He looked at the x-rays of my jaw and the way my respiratory system had finally stabilized. You're fully healed, June, he said, declosing the folder. Physically, there's nothing more we can do. You're as healthy as anyone else out there. I walked out of the hospital and realized I didn't feel like a patient anymore. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a person who had been through a long, violent storm and had finally reached the shore. I'm 30 now. The triplets are grown women. We have our own lives, our own names, and our own scars. Sometimes when I'm in the city, I see a billboard for a real estate company and I feel a brief flash of the old coldness. But then I look at my reflection in a shop window and I see the map on my face. It's a map of a journey that started in a locked attic and ended in the light. I don't need a telescope to see the world anymore. I'm right here, in the middle of it. And for the first time in 30 years, I'm not just watching life happen. I'm the one making it move. I went back to the dark room that night, hung up a fresh print to dry, and watched as my own face slowly emerged from the chemical bath. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't a secret. I was just a woman, standing in a room of her own making, waiting for the light to do its work. The 7th year brought a quiet that I hadn't expected. It wasn't the silence of the attic, that heavy, expectant pressure of waiting for a door to open. It was the silence of a house that was simply at peace. I spent more time at the cabin, working remotely from a desk that faced the woods. Pixel would sit on the windowsill, watching the birds, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to document every second of the outside world. I was finally living in it, rather than just recording it. Leo moved his studio into the cabin that autumn. We didn't make a big announcement. There was no perfect couple photo shoot for social media. He just showed up with a truck full of tripods and a crate of vinyl records. We spent the weekends hiking through the back brush, looking for the specific kind of light that only exists right before a storm, the kind of light that makes everything look sharp and honest. One afternoon, while I was clearing out some old files on my laptop, I came across the original code I had used to hack the Gala's AV system. I stared at the lines of text. To anyone else, it was just Python script and network protocols. To me, it was the sound of my own voice breaking through a wall of glass. I realized then that I wanted to teach, not just code, but agency. I started a small workshop in the city for kids in the foster system, the liabilities and the unmarketable ones, the kids who had been told in one way or another that their brand wasn't worth the investment. On the first day, a 15-year-old girl named Maya sat in the back, her hoodie pulled low, her eyes fixed on the floor. She reminded me so much of the version of myself that used to hide behind the telescope. "You're not here to learn how to make websites," I told the class, standing at the front without a mask, letting the scars be exactly what they were. "You're here to learn how to build a world where nobody can turn you off." Maya looked up. She didn't look at my face with pity. She looked at me with recognition. By the end of the month, she had coded a program that encrypted her personal journals so her foster siblings couldn't read them. It was a small victory, but in her world, it was an empire. The news of my mother's death came on a Tuesday. It was a cold, rainy afternoon in November. The facility called to say she had passed away in her sleep. There were no dramatic last words, no final confrontation where she looked me in the eye and asked for forgiveness. She just slipped away, a ghost finally leaving the house she'd been haunting for years. Clara, Mia, and I met at a small cemetery near the facility. We didn't invite anyone else. There were no cameras, no speeches about perfect families, and no fake brochures. We stood in the rain as the casket was lowered. It was heavy and solid, unlike the empty one they'd used for me. "Are you okay?" Clara asked, linking her arm through mine. "I feel lighter," I said, and it was true. The last thread of the old life had snapped. The woman who had tried to curate me out of existence was gone, and I was still standing. We didn't stay long. We went to a diner afterward and ordered greasy fries and coffee. We talked about the holidays. We talked about Aunt Sarah's new greenhouse. We laughed until Mia nearly choked on her drink. Anyone looking at us would have just seen three sisters having lunch. They wouldn't have seen the triplets, or the twins, and the secret. They would have just seen three women who liked each other's company. That night, back at the cabin, I went into the dark room. I had a roll of film I'd taken during my workshop with the kids. I developed a shot of Maya. She was leaning over her keyboard, a sliver of a smile on her face, and her eyes bright with the realization of her own power. I hung the photo up to dry and then went out onto the deck. The rain had stopped, and the air was crisp. I looked toward the horizon where the lights of the city glowed like a distant fire. My father was still in prison. My mother was in the ground, and my sisters were finally free. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs, the lungs that were never supposed to survive. I wasn't a tragedy. I wasn't a miracle. I was a person. I turned back toward the house, toward the light and the music Leo was playing inside, and I closed the door behind me. I didn't lock it. I didn't have to. I was finally exactly where I was meant to be. I was June. I was alive, and the rest of the story was mine to write.